A wild lioness, bleeding and limping, steps out of the jungle, but she's not here to attack. Clutched in her mouth, her dying cub. And what she does next leaves a wildlife photographer frozen in shock. This isn't a fight for survival. It's a desperate plea for help. And the man's response? It stuns the world. It started with a sound no one ever forgets, a lioness's roar. It wasn't just any roar. It was deep, guttural, and filled with something that didn't quite belong in a predator's cry, desperation. Wildlife photographer Daniel Briggs had been in the Okavango forest for over 3 weeks. His tent sat deep within a protected area, where human footsteps were rare and wild stories waited in the thick green. Daniel wasn't new to danger. He had faced elephants charging, crocodiles lurking, and leopards stalking in the dead of night. But he wasn't ready for this. That morning had begun quietly. Mist drifted lazily through the trees, birds called overhead, and the golden sun cast long shadows on the forest floor. Daniel had found the perfect clearing, a spot surrounded by ancient trees, where animals often came to drink from a hidden stream. He was crouched low behind a bush, camera ready, hoping to capture something extraordinary. He never imagined that extraordinary would walk right toward him, bleeding. From between the trees emerged a lioness. Alone, massive, limping. She wasn't like the ones Daniel had photographed before, roaring with power, owning the savannah. No, this lioness was different. Her shoulders drooped. Her body trembled with each step. And most haunting of all, her golden eyes were locked on Daniel. He froze. Every muscle in his body screamed, "Run! Hide! Protect yourself!" But his camera stayed, clutched in his hand, and his heart thudded in his ears. That's when he saw it. Dangling gently from her mouth was a cub. Tiny, limp. Its soft fur was stained red, and its legs hung lifeless. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He expected the worst, that the lioness, in her grief or fury, might attack. He slowly backed up, trying to create distance without making sudden moves. But the lioness didn't growl. She didn't charge. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she kept walking. Her movements were slow, almost cautious, like every step was a decision. As she approached Daniel, her eyes never left his. But it wasn't the look of a predator sizing up prey. It was something far more human. It was pain, and something even stranger, hope. The lioness came within feet of Daniel, so close he could see the cuts on her legs, the rise and fall of her chest. Then she did something no one would believe unless they saw it themselves. She gently laid the cub on the forest floor. Then, without a sound, she collapsed right beside it. Her body dropped to the earth with a heavy thud. Dust rose. Her breath was labored. She didn't try to protect the cub, didn't move to pick it up. Instead, she looked at Daniel, not with rage, not with fear, but with something that sent shivers down his spine. A silent plea. Daniel knew in that moment. This wasn't a wild animal protecting her territory. This was a mother who had done everything she could. And now, she was asking a human stranger to do something impossible. Save her baby. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the forest anymore. Every instinct screamed run. Every fiber of his body told him he was standing far too close to a wild predator, a lioness no less. But something stronger rooted him to the ground, a feeling he couldn't explain. It was like the universe had pressed pause on everything. There was no camera, no job, no logic, just this moment. And the look in her eyes. The lioness didn't growl. She didn't snarl or show her teeth. In fact, she did the exact opposite of what anyone would expect from a wild, wounded beast. She let out a sound so soft, so fragile, it caught Daniel completely off guard. She whimpered, not like an angry roar, but a slow, aching cry, like she was hurting inside. And then, almost painfully, she nudged the tiny, broken cub toward Daniel with her nose. Just a few inches, just enough to show she was giving him permission. Then she backed away, never breaking eye contact. She didn't threaten him. She didn't try to shield her cub. It was as if she was saying, "Please do something." Daniel's hands were shaking. His brain was racing. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't in any wildlife manual, any documentary, any book. No lion ever asked a human for help. And no human was foolish enough to walk toward a lioness and touch her cub. But something told Daniel this was different. He moved slowly, inching forward, crouching down. His breath was shallow, and his body was tense. But the lioness didn't move. She sat there, watching him, trusting him. Daniel gently reached out and touched the cub. Its fur was still warm, but barely. The little body was limp, its breath shallow and spaced apart. Blood matted the soft fur on its side, and when Daniel lifted the cub slightly, it gave a faint, almost invisible twitch. He gasped. It was still alive, but barely. The wounds were deep, probably from a jackal or hyena. And the lioness? She must have fought them off and carried the cub through the forest just to find someone, anyone, who might be able to help. Daniel felt the weight of the moment crush him. What was he supposed to do? This was beyond dangerous. What if she changed her mind and attacked? What if touching the cub triggered something wild in her? 1,000 questions flew through his head. Should he run for help? Should he leave them alone and let nature take its course? Should he try to lift the cub and get it to the mobile vet unit 10 miles away? But time was running out. The cub's chest rose and fell, then paused. Daniel didn't have hours. He had minutes, maybe less. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He took off his camera vest, wrapped the cub inside it, and whispered softly to the lioness, "I'm going to help your baby. I promise." And incredibly, she let him. He gently but firmly wrapped the tiny, barely breathing cub in his weatherproof jacket. His hands trembled as he tucked the cub close to his chest, trying to keep it warm. Its body was limp. The bleeding hadn't stopped, but there was still a flicker of life, and that was all Daniel needed. "I'm going to help him," he whispered softly, glancing at the lioness just feet away. He didn't know why he said it out loud. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe he hoped she'd understand. Maybe, somehow, she did. The lioness didn't growl, didn't block his path. She simply stood up slowly, her muscles straining, and watched as he turned and walked away. Daniel didn't run. He knew better than to show panic in front of a wild predator. But he moved quickly, weaving between trees, dodging branches, cradling the cub like a newborn. His vehicle was parked nearly a mile away, beyond a rocky ridge. Every second dragged like an hour. And then he heard something behind him. Footsteps, heavy ones. He turned his head just slightly and saw her. The lioness was following him, not sprinting, not hunting, just walking, limping, keeping a careful distance, watching, as if she needed to see where he was taking her baby, as if she couldn't let her cub out of sight. Even now, the image was surreal. A man carrying a wounded lion cub through the forest, followed by the cub's injured mother, trusting him with something no wild animal should ever trust a human with her child. After nearly 20 exhausting minutes, Daniel burst through the last thicket and reached his off-road vehicle. He placed the cub gently on the passenger seat, then turned, ready for anything. The lioness had stopped at the tree line. She didn't growl, didn't move forward, just stood there, eyes locked on him. Daniel gave her a small nod, his silent promise still intact, before starting the engine and driving. 15 minutes later, tires screeched to a halt outside a mobile veterinary outpost, run by a small local wildlife rescue team. When the vets saw Daniel leap from the car, holding a bleeding lion cub wrapped in a coat, their jaws dropped. But that wasn't even the wildest part. One of the staff shouted, "Daniel, there's a lion outside the fence." The lioness had followed him all the way there. She stood just beyond the main gate, pacing, ears alert, eyes locked on the building. She wasn't trying to get in. She was watching, waiting. And every time someone inside the clinic moved too close to the windows, she let out a low, threatening growl, warning them to be careful. Inside, chaos turned to focus. The team of vets sprang into action. They cleaned the wounds, gave the cub oxygen, and prepped for emergency surgery. The cub had internal bleeding, several deep gashes, and a dangerously low heartbeat. The procedure took hours. Daniel never left the room. And outside the glass, the lioness never moved. Then finally, the heart monitor beeped steadily. The cub breathed on his own. He had survived. For 3 long days, The veterinary outpost became the most unusual blend of wilderness and medicine anyone had ever seen. Inside, the cub, now affectionately named Keto, meaning jewel in Swahili, remained under constant care. He was sedated, stitched up, and stabilized with fluids and antibiotics. Every few hours, a vet would check his vitals, adjust his medications, or gently wipe the sweat off his tiny face. But outside, something even more incredible was happening. The Lioness, Keto's mother, never left. She paced for hours at first, circling the outpost perimeter, growling softly whenever a new face appeared. Yet she never tried to break in. She never showed aggression, only protective stillness. On the second night, she lay down directly outside the fence, curled near a bush, her ears alert but her body still. She slept there in the dirt, like a guard or a grieving parent refusing to leave her child. The staff was stunned. Lions didn't act like this. They were territorial, dangerous, unpredictable. But this lioness was different. She was waiting. And deep down, Daniel knew. She trusted him. Daniel stayed by Keto's side for most of those days, sitting silently for hours, his camera untouched. He whispered to the cub sometimes soft things, hopeful things. "You're going to make it, little guy. Your mama's right outside." He never expected the cub to understand his words, but somehow, it felt like Keto did. When Keto finally opened his eyes on the morning of day 3, Daniel was there. The tiny lion blinked slowly, weak but alert, his small chest rising and falling with steady breath. His paws twitched. He let out a soft, raspy sound. Not quite a roar, but not quite a cry either. And that was when the vets nodded. He's ready to go back. Daniel's heart thundered in his chest. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the release, the return. He scooped Keto up gently in his arms, feeling the cub's soft fur against his forearms, the rising heat of his tiny body. Outside, the morning light poured through the trees like gold dust, and the forest sang with birdsong. He walked toward the edge of the woods, toward the exact place where it had all begun. And then the shadows moved. She was there. The lioness stepped out from behind the brush. Her eyes locked onto Daniel's, and then shifted to Keto. She didn't run, didn't roar. She simply stood there waiting. Daniel knelt down, his eyes stinging with emotion. He placed the cub on the earth, right in front of her. Keto let out a tiny cry. The lioness responded with a low, deep purr, a sound that shook the air. She stepped forward, lowered her head, and gently sniffed her cub. Then she licked his face once, twice. He wobbled toward her, pressing into her chest. And then she turned to Daniel. Her eyes held his for several long seconds. Not with fear, not with warning, with gratitude. And then, without a sound, the two lions turned and vanished into the trees. His days were quieter now, but his heart carried the weight of a moment so rare, so profound, it refused to fade. At first, he thought no one would believe him. After all, who would accept that a wild lioness approached a human not to attack, but to ask for help? But the world did believe him. Within days of the incident, Daniel's footage and photographs, along with vet reports, began circulating online. Wildlife blogs picked it up first, then national news, then international headlines. One article read, "A wild lioness brings her injured cub to a human. What he did next saved a life." Another, "A mother's instinct. Lioness pleads with man to save her baby." The video clips went viral. Millions watched in awe as the lioness gently set down her cub, and the man, frozen in disbelief, risked his life to save it. People were captivated, not just by the rarity of the moment, but by the silent understanding between species who were supposed to fear one another. Experts weighed in from around the globe. Some wildlife biologists said it must have been pure instinct, a desperate animal recognizing a presence that didn't feel like a threat. Others went deeper, saying this was evidence of emotional intelligence in lions far beyond what had been documented. The lioness had made a choice, a conscious one. She had chosen hope over instinct, and that choice had saved her cub's life. Many called it a miracle, but for Daniel, it was something even deeper, a gift. A year passed. Seasons changed. Daniel returned to photography. He spoke at conferences. He was even offered a book deal. But something kept calling him back, to the Okavango forest, to that same hidden clearing where everything had happened. So, with a quiet heart and cautious hope, Daniel returned. He hiked through the thick green, camera slung over his shoulder, stepping carefully through familiar paths. He didn't expect anything. He wasn't here for headlines. He just needed to see. And then, the forest hushed. Daniel stepped into the clearing and froze. There she was, the lioness. She looked almost the same, stronger, healthier, but unmistakable. Her eyes, golden and sharp, locked onto his. And standing beside her, head high, chest strong, was a young lion. Taller now, his mane just beginning to grow, his eyes full of fire. Keto. They didn't move. Neither did Daniel. No fences, no barriers, just three souls in a moment of pure connection. No growls, no roars, just silence and understanding. Then, as gently as they had arrived, the two lions turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving only paw prints and a man in tears behind them. Daniel stood there for a long time, because in the wild, nothing is promised. No second chances, no mercy, no guarantees. But on that day, long ago, a lioness didn't see a man as an enemy. She saw him as a last hope. And Daniel? He answered the call. A wild lioness, bleeding and limping, steps out of the jungle. But she's not here to attack. Clutched in her mouth, her dying cub. And what she does next leaves a wildlife photographer frozen in shock. This isn't a fight for survival. It's a desperate plea for help. And the man's response? It stuns the world. If you like the video, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share.